Hello, my name is Emmanuel Ogundepe, and today I'm going to briefly discuss the economic motivations behind Donald Trump's administration's steel tariff. So the steel tariff 2018. Okay. On March 8th, 2018, Trump announced that he will impose a tariff on 25% of all steel imports and 10% of all aluminum imports from all countries not in North America, so not including Canada and Mexico. Even though Canada is one of the biggest producers of steel in the United States, a tariff can't be placed on them because of NAFTA. So basically, to put it in simple terms, LeBron is Canada, his hand is NAFTA, and the tariff is the ball, and Trump is this poor Spurs player that I do not know the name of. The reasoning behind this, according to economist Robert E. Scott, is that excess amounts of global steel is causing import dumping. So, import dumping. Okay. So, import dumping is when a country imports at a price lower than the domestic price of the good. So, price, imported price is lower, is lower, okay, is lower than domestic price. Okay. The import dumping mainly comes from China, and it leads to a lot of potential problems in the long run because the idea behind dumping is to get rid of the overcapacity in one's own country by exporting it to another country at a very cheap price. So China can export their steel at a price lower than what's acceptable for a steel producer in the United States who's trying to make a living. And so many economists argue that the price that steel is being imported at is lower than the long run equilibrium. And that is not sustainable in the long run. Eventually, this low price will cause United States firms to close down. So let's draw a little sad boy walking away, has his briefcase filled with steel, I guess. And the industries are, they just can't compete with these low prices. Steel Co. And after that happens, it will pretty much give China and a little bit of Europe a monopoly over United States steel because they'll be the only ones producing it. This is pretty bad because steel is an input cost for a lot of United States produced goods, and the military uses steel a lot. So if a foreign country has a monopoly over United States, the steel that the United States uses, and not only is that bad economically, because as we figured out from earlier in the year, monopolies are never socially efficient, and it could potentially be a matter of national security if we ever get beef with China or something like that. Another motivation is that it will bring a lot of jobs to the steel industry. I found various estimations of how many jobs it will create. I found estimations from 30,000 to 150K. And that's such a large range. That's 120,000. That it's pretty much useless if I gave you a concrete number. Like it'll create 58,463 jobs. Like that's really random and arbitrary. It won't necessarily even be correct. So all that's really important is that the minimum number, 30,000, is pretty large number of jobs created. So with all the negatives going on in the steel industry right now, one might think that this tariff is definitely the move. Like we should implement it as soon as possible. In fact, we should have implemented it yesterday. Well, it's actually been implemented over a month ago. But that's not necessarily the case because there are a lot of potential drawbacks to this tariff. I found four main ones from my research, and I'll just list them real quick and explain what they are. So, number one, prices go up for steel consumers. I mean, this seems like an obvious like result of the tariff because the United States steel producers can't produce at the super low price that steel is being imported at. So it's just natural that prices will go up. And then you'd figure that steel consumers will just suck it up and pay at this higher price for the greater good of the economy. But that's not necessarily what will probably happen. If you look at the last time there was a steel tariff implemented in the United States, it was under George W. Bush's administration back in 2002. The steel consumers pushed back heavily against the higher prices, and the outcry against the tariff caused it to be withdrawn only 21 months after implementation. And the Consuming Industries Trade Action Coalition, they reported that about 200,000 workers in United States manufacturing lost their jobs. That's a huge loss, especially because at the time, the U.S. steel industry, like the whole steel industry, was about 197,000. So that's a huge loss for not that much gain. And number two, the second problem that I'll talk about is production will reduce in steel-based industries. Steel production. Goodness gracious, my handwriting. All right, production decreases. Um, so steel is an input cost for a lot of firms. So an increase in input costs will decrease production, reduce the quantity of steel. To put it graphically, just look at a simple supply and demand, supply, quantity, price. And so this will be the equilibrium right here. And then this increase in the input costs will cause the supply curve to shift to the left. Oh my gosh. Alright, let's just say SN for S new. And then so you could see that the quantity goes down. So this is the quantity before an equilibrium, and then this is the Q new. The price also goes up. And with a decrease in the quantity produced of the rate at which the economy is growing will decrease as a whole as a result of this decrease in the quantity of steel-based goods produced. So it has a lot of effects outside of the steel industry itself. And then the third one is disruption effects. Okay. Switching from foreign to domestic imports would create costs, and these costs are the disruption effects of this tariff. Just like how when the rate of inflation increases or decreases by a significant amount, there are menu costs. There are disruption effects when you switch over from foreign to domestic imports. Um, that's the case for everything in economics. If you make a significant change, there will always be a cost. And these disruption effects is that the steel production industry might not be able to handle this increase in demand because all of these people will be switching over from foreign imports to domestic imports. They're going to require that same level of importation just from domestic producers instead. And because the economy is operating at close to full capacity, and the steel industry in the United States has been on the decline since the 1960s, they might not be able to handle this new demand. And it could create quite the shock to the system soon after the implementation of this tariff. And the fourth problem that could arise is that other countries have economies too. So reducing U.S. imports means reducing our trade partners' exports. It's just the natural balance of things. This negatively affects their GDP, which makes them pretty salty. And as a representation of this, so you draw the other country right here. And they are getting a tariff thrown at them, I'll just say by the United States. Say happy. They're happy because they think all is well and good and they're fixing their own economy. So their saltiness will cause them to become petty, and they will respond by throwing their own tariff at the United States. And this isn't just speculation. Like, the EU has already threatened to put tariffs on U.S. textiles and U.S. produced alcoholic beverages. Pretty sure it was Levi and bourbon that they threatened to put tariffs on. And this will naturally negatively affect the United States exporters of those goods. And it will cause a trade war, which could potentially strain international relations. Economists are pretty split on which route it will take, but the tariff was already implemented back in late March, so there's not much we can do to prevent it if it is bad. I personally am split, and so all we can really do is wait and see.